Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode 909, the weekly show that's all about weather. This is going to be the episode for Monday, the 19th of June, but little secret, we're doing the production on Thursday, the 15th of June, which means it's a vacation week for yours truly. I don't get a lot of time off, and every year, mid-June, I take my first week of the year. It's a really long, tough stretch from January through mid-June. It's a great stretch. I mean, goodness, the school programs, the things I do, I'm living the dream. I will never ever complain about long hours or no sleep, but everybody, I don't care who you are or what you do, you need a little mental health break every once in a while. And so accordingly, I will take one next week. So anyway, we're producing the show a little early. It's a Thursday night special, but let's bring in everybody. And by the way, this is the pre-show. That for those that don't know, this is the magical part of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say very outrageous things. And I will say that many of us are very actively involved with weather as we do this program. I know that Kim's got issues where she is. I've got issues where I am here. So, but it's okay. Kim, who's your guest?
This is Zoe.
Oh, yes.
Hi.
Hey.
Hello, everybody. I'll be able to
Zoe.
hang on the show tonight for as long as she lets me.
Zoe will love me when she hits sixth grade. There's our first grade when they're 6 years old. There's something about when they hit six, the light turns on. They understand Mr. James. For a short time between first and fourth grade, they love me. They think I'm funny. I mean, those are my people. I'm not the best with preschoolers, and I'm really bad with middle school and high school kids. But the first through fourth graders, they love me. So when Zoe is 6 years old and headed to first grade, she'll think Mr. James is funny. So,
well, you know the reason the middle schoolers don't like you.
Well, they don't like anybody
because you tell them that they smell bad.
Well, they do. I mean, you go teach sixth grade. It's horrifying. And what the boys do after PE, they spray themselves down with Axe, and they think it's love nectar. They think the girls are just going to love on them. And the truth is, it's a sewage treatment plant. It's a cesspool. So if by chance you're a sixth grader watching this, guys, don't do that. I had to suspend a kid as a baseball coach. He would do it in the dugout, and it was, imagine that little closed space, and you just couldn't get away from it. So anyway, yeah, we are going to make it through this show, through all of the storms. In fact, Kim, what's the latest? How you doing out there? I haven't even looked at the radar in Oklahoma yet.
Yeah, we're in a gap in the storm. So there was stuff that fired sort of west of Lawton, and then it started to move south and east a little bit. And we got clipped by some of that rain and some of the storms. There was really impressive lightning for a bit, but we largely missed the craziness of those storms. But there's the stuff off to the northwest now, Woodward down to toward Elk City, that is firing, and there are active tornado warnings and this is embedded mess of stuff that should congeal into a line that comes toward us. So that'll be what we're watching this evening as the show progresses.
Yeah, we've got a tornado warning at our hotels in Ardmore right now, and we've just given them the all clear though, because the circulation is going toward Overbrook. And I think they're going to be okay, but probably some 1-inch hail. There was some impressive hail back in Lawton. I don't know if y'all saw some of those spiky 5-inch diameter hailstones. They were pretty impressive.
Jeez. And that's what today, there's the potential for tornadoes, but the wind-driven hail is the feature today. So I'm hoping, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that this one leaves my roof alone. It's been a good, like, what, 2 years we've had this roof since the last hail disaster. So,
Was that about the life? Is that the life expectancy of a roof in Norman, Kim? 2 years.
right, it's getting to be, and we did the class 4 shingles, so it's resistant, but to a point, right? To a point. If you get spiky 3+ inch hail, then you're toast. No matter what kind of roof you've got, we just would be lucky that we wouldn't have holes actively in our roof. It would at least hold.
Punch a hole in that decking so fast.
Yes, yes. Which was so scary to think about.
Poor Randy. He's sitting out there. Are you in Tucson, Randy? Is that where you are?
No, in Tempe.
In Tempe. I never can get my Arizona major universities right.
Arizona State, not University of Arizona.
You're loving watching all this severe weather from afar, huh?
Yeah, well, we actually did a lot of interviews today. Today's the formal technical start of the monsoon, so we're trying to get people up and aware of what they need to expect over the next few months.
That's always interesting. We'll have to
what do you do as
talk
part of
about
that?
that some.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Bill. I was just curious what you do as part of that awareness building.
We're basically telling, there's always a lot of newcomers that are here in the Phoenix and Arizona in general. And, during a dust storm, pull off to the side of the road, turn your lights off, take your foot off the brake, those kind of things that need to be understood as we get into the dusty part of the monsoon.
Yeah, it's different for people who are transplants. Very different.
And most people in Arizona are transplants.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get this thing started here. And again, for those watching on the television side, we are not live this week. We pre-produced the show last Thursday, June 15th. Some are watching live, but on the television side, you'll be watching this on Monday, the 19th. So let's get the recorders going here, and we'll get this show on the road. All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains episode number 909. This is the weekly show all about weather. This is for Monday, the 19th of June, 2023. Little secret, we're recording this actually on Thursday, June 15th, because for those that listen to the podcast version, I will be off. Well, I'm never off the grid, but I will be taking a break from the normal work schedule for a little mental health break, a vacation week, first of the year. So thanks to the crew for coming in on a Thursday night. And Dr. Neil Jacobs, it is good to see you back. How are you, sir?
I am doing great. I'm glad to be back. It's been a while.
It has. So are you in North Carolina?
I am.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. Jen, good to see you. How are you?
Doing good. Watching a few storms. It's interesting if you pull up the radar out of Cleveland, there's something spinny going on up south of Sandusky right now. It's really kind of active. So we've got some pretty good rain and waiting on more storms to roll through.
There's a lot of twisting and turning in the atmosphere these days or much of the country. Very anomalous pattern for June. We'll do a weather roundup here a little later in the show. But let's see. Kim, would you please introduce your guest to the world here?
Yep, this is our friend of the show. She's been on, this I think is her third or so appearance. And this is Zoe McLean, 9 months old. Very delighted to be here because she is actively rejecting going to bed. So hi, everyone.
That's a great show title, Actively Rejecting Going to Bed. All right. Well, Bill Murray, let's get right to it. Let's bring in our guest. It's going to be a good show this week.
Yeah, James, I'm really excited. It's been a long time since we've had tonight's guest on the show. He was a part of show number 210 or 220, which was back in April 2010. Randy Cervini, it's been too long. What have you been up to?
Quite a bit, actually. It's been an event-filled last decade, I guess, because we've done an incredible amount of work with the World Meteorological Organization and are pretty pleased with where we're at now in terms of gauging world weather extremes.
Yeah, you go out and chase some of the biggest extremes out there for verification purposes. Talk about some of the bigger ones you've done in the last decade plus 3 years that has been since we talked to you.
Well, basically, we do what individual countries do with the National Climate Extremes Group here in the United States, for example. When there is a record for the US, hottest temperature or a snowfall or something along those lines, NOAA gets together a bunch of people and they evaluate the record and determine whether it's real or not. Well, all the way back in 2007, I realized that we didn't have an equivalent type of thing for the world. And so a few people and I, people like Chris Lancy of the hurricane specialist, Roger Edwards out of Storm Prediction Center, we decided, hey, we need to do this. And we got the World Meteorological Organization excited about it. And we put together a website of actual extremes that we have verified around the world. And so the hottest temperature, for example, is the 134 degree temperature that was recorded all the way back in 1930, now I'm blanking on the date there, back in the early 1900s in Death Valley. One of the types of evaluations we did was to reject a long-standing temperature that was held in Libya that claimed to be the world's hottest temperature. And we took a team of experts and we really diligently went over all of the available data. And we were able to pretty conclusively show that, yeah, there were some mistakes made and that the observation probably wasn't legitimate.
And so that record came back to the United States, didn't it?
The record came back to the United States and has remained that way, although recently we've had a couple of near contenders. We had a couple of temperatures that approached 134 degrees. It got up to 129 degrees in Kuwait and in Pakistan just a couple years ago. But so far, the 134 has remained our best hottest temperature recorded across the globe.
USA.
I will tell you right now, actually, though, we have a more recent observation that was made at Death Valley at the place called Furnace Creek that we are actively investigating. Part of the newest suite of things that we do when we investigate these kinds of extremes is that we actually have the equipment that was used to measure it. The temperature sensor in Death Valley was replaced with another sensor, and that original sensor was taken to an independent calibration lab and is undergoing testing to make sure that it was working properly when it recorded the 130 degrees.
Wow. So can you trust that verification from that far back? Do instruments change over time?
That's the problem, is the really early ones, like the current record that was back in 1913. I have my information right here. The record back then, no, we don't have the original equipment that was used to make that. We do have the actual handwritten observations. We do have other information that we can use. But yeah, it's not as perfect as what kind of evaluations that we do nowadays.
Part of the panel thinks that your formation of this group that's going around doing these international verifications may be a little interesting, that gets you some international travel, Randy. That sounds like a good idea there. That ruse.
Well, I couldn't help but just note that, hey, and you of course need this for specific team who knows what they're doing to go out to these places and do the archival research. That's a critical part of this.
I
Well,
mean,
just-
Actually,
Jim's
we
idea,
don't do a lot of travel on this.
I would totally be okay going back and forth to Geneva, but I'm not so sure about going to Death Valley.
Yeah, that's a little, or Kuwait or any of these other crazy places you probably end up in, Randy. So that's pretty funny.
Yeah, what we do is we actually have teams that have pretty precise roles. So I have when I put together a team to do an evaluation, and it's always an ad hoc team, it's not the same people each particular time, but we always have a local representative, usually somebody from the country's weather service in which the record that we are investigating is associated with. So in the case of Death Valley, I have people that are from NWS at Las Vegas that are working with me on that particular investigation. Then I have experts from around the world, because this is not United States always, it's the World Meteorological Organization. So I have experts from around the world that are representatives of particular specialties. So I have people that are really knowledgeable about weather temperature instruments and weather records, weather temperature records, like Phil Jones from England, or Blair Twian from Australia. Top-notch people that know their stuff. And we put together a committee. The local representative gets us all of the information that they have available. The calibration reports, photographs of the site, all sorts of transcripts associated with the particular record. And the committee goes over that with a fine-tooth comb. And we have pretty major discussions as to what we think about it, whether there's any possibility of error, whether there's any problems with it, are we missing any particular information? And eventually the committee has to make a recommendation to me as to whether they think that the record is valid or not. They do that, and then I make the determination as to whether to accept their evaluation or not. And we've worked this now for things like temperature, but we've also worked it for wind. We've worked it for pressure, for rainfall. We even have tornado records. We, for a long time, up until 2011, the greatest number of tornadoes that had ever occurred in a 24-hour period was the classic one that took place back in 1974, I believe, the great outbreak there. But in 2011, of course, we had that other outbreak that took place over the southeastern United States. And when we totaled up the numbers, we were able to determine that, yes, that is the new record of the most amount of tornadoes that have occurred within a 24-hour period.
When you go overseas and you talk to these meteorologists from these international met services, is this like a badge of honor for them to win a record or whatever?
Oh, we've lost Randy's audio. Maybe a little short in the old mic.
There we go.
There
we go. Okay. There are some places that take very great pride in being a record holder. One of the big records that we've done recently was to assess the highest wind speed that's been recorded on the planet, not estimated, but recorded using instrumentation. The record used to be held at Mount Washington Observatory in New Hampshire, 231 miles an hour. If you've been there, of course, they have big signs that proclaim that was the record of the greatest wind. However, in now 1996, our greatest wind speed was recorded by an automated station that was in the northwest corner of Australia on a little island. And that wind speed actually was 253 miles an hour. So there were a lot of people in New Hampshire that emailed me and said, "You're taking one of our long-held records away from us, and we're going to revoke your passport into New Hampshire." And such unfortunately is the way things can happen occasionally.
So in this process, I mean, I've always been fascinated by like the Guinness Book of World Records and people coming up with like new categories just to post a record. Do you have people contacting you trying to get you to make a new category just so they can get a record posted?
Well, yeah, I have a lot of people contacting me, but not so much in terms of new categories. One of the things, unfortunately, is that as a member of the World Meteorological Organization, we not only are scientific, but we're political. So I will get occasionally people that are saying that some of my records for regions of the world should be taken away. For example, one of the records for Europe, because of the political way that the world is divided, the country of Israel is considered to be part of Europe. Don't ask me why. Geographically, it doesn't make sense. But they hold the record for the hottest temperature for the European region. I get a lot of people that tell me, no, the country of Israel doesn't exist. I should remove it, and that type of thing. But we do have new records, and it's when technology allows us to come up with a new record. When we've initially started the project, the weather extremes for the world, one of the categories that we didn't consider was lightning, because at the time back in 2007, we didn't have the equipment that would be able to tell us how long an individual lightning strike would last or how far it could travel. With the advent first of the land-based sensor networks, lightning detection networks, and then later on with the satellites that we now have up, we can accurately determine how long and how far a lightning strike can actually move and exist. And the numbers are incredible. The longest lightning strike that we now have on record lasted 17 seconds from start to finish. The longest distance that one individual lightning strike has traveled was just off the coast of the United States, basically went from Mississippi all the way to Texas, was a distance of 477 miles, one particular lightning strike. And that's all because of new technology. We now have the ability to assess those incredibly big events. And when we first started this project, we didn't have that.
You know, following up with that, I was thinking about the Guinness Book of World Records too, and it's just, there are things that are fun to read in there because they're unexpected. So, okay, even if people aren't able to get you to change some of the categories or the countries and, you know, the geopolitics being what it is, what kinds of records exist that people might find just interesting or quirky? What are some of your favorite of the records that you keep?
Well, one of the ones that might be surprising to most people is one that we don't keep. That in the World Meteorological Records archive, we don't have snow records. We don't list maximum amounts of snow. And that's because snow measurement is one of the most difficult things to do properly around the country and around the world. Back in 1996, I believe, there was a potential record that took place in New York, where somebody had been measuring the snowfall and claimed then that there was a new record snowfall. I think it was something like 77 inches of snow in a 24-hour period. The trouble was that they were making their measurements too frequently. And when you make snow measurements, you have to allow for the snow to compress. And so if you make measurements too frequently and then add up all the totals, you're going to come up with an inflated number. Well, U.S. extremes through that observation for New York out. Across the world, it's even harder to make sure that the measurements are done properly. So at this particular time, we don't have an official highest snowfall rate because the measurements are simply too hard to verify. That's one of the ones that's probably the more bizarre, is the lack of that. But we also have records like hailstones. The largest hailstone that we have officially verified across the world took place in Bangladesh and was a hailstone that was over 2.2 pounds when it fell. We've had a few that have been close here in the United States. The Vivian, South Dakota one that occurred back in 2011, I believe, was close to that, but the record is still in Asia with a stone that fell that was 2.2 pounds.
That's impressive. Do you guys do anything? Are there any records for space weather, or is it all terrestrial?
At this particular time, we've limited ourselves just to this planet. And I've even had some problems with this planet. The World Meteorological Organization is a part of the United Nations. And the United Nations has its own very particular area that it's controlling, that it monitors, that it is associated with. Antarctica is not part of that. Antarctica is not part of the United Nations. It's not an independent country. It is run by international treaty. So when we started the project, one of the questions we had to ask is, can we actually have records for Antarctica? We ended up doing that. The United Nations told us, well, yeah, go ahead, but don't say that they're part of the United Nations, because they aren't. But we do actually have records for Antarctica. We have to have 3 different types because of the treaty. The treaty for Antarctica, for example, says that the Antarctic region is the region that is at or south of 60 degrees south latitude. Well, that's a whole bunch of area. So we had to come up with a kind of a fine-tuned definition where we said, all right, we have that definition. We're also going to use Antarctica as being the continent of Antarctica and the nearby islands. And then my polar experts told me that we needed to have a third definition, because Antarctica isn't a flat continent. It's got very, very high elevation to it. So we have also records for Antarctica in terms of what we call the plateau, where the elevation is above 2,500 meters. So even for the US or for the world, we have to kind of wave our hands sometimes to get things to work right. We haven't yet expanded out off of this planet. Although some people have contacted me and said, we have enough probes on Mars now that we could start looking at the extremes that happen on Mars. So far, the United Nations hasn't allowed me to say, yeah, we're going to expand our archive to beyond the world. We are the World Meteorological Organization, not yet the Solar System Meteorological Organization.
That's coming. Just give it time. So Randy, that lightning strike that you talked about, that really was a bolt from the blue. I mean, that really was a crazy statistic and a crazy incident.
Yeah, it's one of the weird things. This project has actually helped to rewrite some of the fundamental definitions of weather. We didn't realize that. But if you go back to the Glossary of Meteorology, which is the kind of the Bible that a lot of us meteorologists use, you look under lightning flash, you will see that the technical definition says that it's an event that lasts less than a second normally. We have found that while that's true, normally it doesn't last more than a second. In some cases, it can last as long as 17 seconds. And so we're actually kind of causing some of the way that we think about meteorology based off of some of these extremes to have to be rewritten.
So Dr. Clucko McLean is proposing that that we use the title the Solar System Meteorological Organization tonight, and we really wanted you to talk tonight about the WMO, but it didn't start out as the WMO. Randy did it, and
No,
when it was originally put together.
No, it didn't. And what's interesting is that, as I mentioned, we are now a part of the United Nations. And so a lot of people think, well, okay, so we've had weather cooperation among all nations since 1948 or so. Well, no, we actually predate almost every political organization that tried to come up with global unity. That the World Meteorological Organization's roots, our origin, now dates back 150 years. This year is the 150th anniversary of the organization that eventually became the World Meteorological Organization. And so I find it kind of nice that it wasn't politics that kind of pulled the governments of the world together. It was actually science, and in particular, it was weather science that pulled the world together. And the reason was, back in the 1873, was that as the world was becoming smaller because people were able to travel from one place to another, they realized that one of the important bits of information they needed to know as one person was going from one place to another, as a steamer was going from England over to the United States, or from England down to Australia, they needed to know what the weather was. And they needed to be sure that the weather that was being measured down there in a place like Australia was taken in exactly the same way as the weather measured in the United States or in Europe or in wherever else around the world. So they realized this all the way back in 1873, that, hey, we need to come up with some international standards on how to measure weather. And lo and behold, that's what they did. They got a bunch of meteorologists from around the world together in a committee, and they said, let's create this thing that we're going to call the International Meteorological Organization. It was the IMO back then. And they started it. They started putting together some ideas on how things like weather, temperature measurements should be made. They started putting together compilations of weather around the world. They started developing weather observatories like Mount Washington and places elsewhere around the world. One of the coolest places that I was at recently was a weather station in Ireland that had been there, Valencia, that had been there for over 150 years. And they realized that, yeah, we needed to put this together and have it so that we had international cooperation. It worked. Now, since that time, we had a couple world wars that kind of caused some problems, because when we got into World War, they realized that weather information was a military item, that knowing the weather of a given location could influence the outcome of a war. So the organization kind of fell on some hard times during World War I and World War II. But afterwards, they got together again. They said, yes, this is such a good idea. We need to make sure that we have international cooperation. Well, by the end of World War II, they realized that they needed cooperation not only scientifically, but politically. And the League of Nations had morphed into the United Nations. And the United Nations was looking around. They said, hey, you guys over there in weather, you're doing some really cool work. Guess what? We're going to make you a part of us. So they basically grabbed the World Meteorological Organization and they put it in as part of the United Nations. And so since that particular time, we are considered a special branch of the United Nations. And we're based out of Geneva. So yes, travel to Geneva is a pretty nice thing to be able to do.
Well, we always knew meteorologists should be running the world, right, Dr. Neil Jacobs?
Hey, I've been sitting here plotting a scheme to use weather obs on Mars as sort of a soft aggression way to just annex the whole planet.
And when you were talking about, the cooperations were coming to an end when it came to, use of meteorological information for warfare. Talk about the jet stream, Randy. That was actually one of the big examples of that, wasn't it? The Germans didn't they learn about it first?
They did.
To their advantage.
If you remember back in the early 1900s, the Germans had developed airship technology, the Zeppelin fleet. One of the things, as the rest of Europe and North America was trying to catch up to that, is that they couldn't match the German Zeppelin fleet's abilities. That for some reason, the Zeppelins were always able to get to their location faster than they should. That given the motors that they had back then, and they were pretty good motors, but the ships were coming in ahead of schedule. And they thought, well, maybe it must just be the pilots. Well, what had happened is the Germans had discovered the jet stream. They said, oh, if we take our Zeppelins, our airships, up to 30,000 feet, we can get pushed by a jet stream that will get us to our location a whole lot faster. Now, they realized that that was an economic and a political advantage by knowing that information. So the person that discovered that kind of kept it quiet. And it was only during World War II that the English and the Americans discovered it. They discovered it in a bad way, that in both situations, American and English air fleets were heading into a battle, and they got slowed up dramatically by hitting into a headwind, a strong jet stream headwind, and literally stopped in their tracks. But it pointed out that knowledge of the weather could have some very important economic and military advantages. It's nice to see that we've gotten over that after World War II, once again, all of the countries are working together and exchanging weather information. I have on my World Meteorological Organization committees, my evaluation committees that I put up to evaluate all of the world extremes. I have members from 150 countries so far. I really feel proud of that. I also have made a market attempt to have diversity in there as well, that we have actually more women have served on some of my committees than men in many cases. So we are sharing weather information, and we are having good discussions, even with countries that politically aren't maybe the best of friends right now. We just finished up an investigation. We had a record for Antarctica as to what the hottest temperature was. And of course, Antarctica is considered to be everything south of 60 degrees south. Well, we didn't have an equivalent for the Northern Hemisphere. Somebody said, well, you really need to have the hottest temperature at or north of the Arctic Circle. So we said, okay, that's a legitimate idea. And so we looked at that, and what we came up with was a town in Siberia that had actually reached, and this was only a couple years ago, reached 100 degrees. Siberia in the summer got up to 100 degrees. And that was right at the Arctic Circle at 66 degrees north. So we launched an investigation to verify that the record was taking place. Well, that was also, of course, during the time when Russia invaded Ukraine. And you think, well, maybe that's going to cause some problems. Actually, meteorologically, it didn't. The people that we work with in Russia, people that we work with in China and around the rest of the world, get together when we have this kind of stuff. And we were able to get the particular information. verify that it was correct, and we actually have accepted that record of that city in Siberia. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of it, that reached 100 degrees.
You know, it's interesting you say that about despite geopolitical forces being what they are, we can trust this data. Has there ever been concern among members of the WMO that there could be motive to falsify records, to sort of mess with, the models other countries are running? Because there is still competition that goes on in trying to predict the future a little bit better than everyone else. And you can really mess that up in different ways. And I know, there could be some extent to having quality control, but yeah, is that something that has ever been discussed?
Well, one way that we try to combat that is, again, we have incredibly diverse committees that when I put together an evaluation committee, I'll usually have upwards of 12 or 15 different scientists from around the world. And they are truly from around the world. And our meteorological community is relatively small. I'm able to get, of course, some of the absolute top scientists around the world, and they all know each other. And so it somewhat limits that, in that, if you're going to try to pull off a deception or something, you're going to have the world's best scientists that are looking with microscopes at your data. And you've got to be able to have that withstand that kind of scrutiny. And if it doesn't, we won't accept the record. And we have had records that we haven't accepted, not because necessarily they've been falsified, but because we've identified something that's wrong. One thing that comes into mind was a record that we had received for a place in India, Cherrapunji, which is known for really big rainfalls. And there was a purported rainfall that was on the order of 17 meters of rainfall within a 24-hour period. Whoa, wait a minute. That would be a incredible record. So we got together with a committee, and we contacted the Indian Meteorological group down there, their National Weather Service, who immediately started an internal investigation to say, okay, is this actually legitimate? And they found, when they went back to the actual raw records, that whoever had entered the record in had misplaced a decimal point. And instead of 17 meters, it was 1.7 meters. Still a very big rainfall, but nowhere near the kind of record it would be if it was 17 meters. So we can identify those kind of errors that happen. And that's good, because by getting rid of the errors, we can be more assured that the records that we do have are valid, and we can use them for things like analysis of climate change and that type of thing.
So Randy, you mentioned earlier that, an important initiative early in the organization's history was actually building weather stations, and that was no small feat back then. Today we have so many automations, but back then, that was probably an expensive and fairly involved process. Talk about that for a second.
Right, because not only did you back then have to build the station, you had to have the people that were manning that station that were continually making weather observations. As I mentioned, I traveled recently to Ireland, and there is a very long-lasting weather station that's out on the west coast of Ireland. And of course, again, politics kind of ends into the situation. But when Ireland declared itself independent of Britain, there was fighting that went on right around that particular weather station. And believe it or not, I have the story, and it's been verified. One of the weather observers at that particular station talk about diligence to duty, went out to where the Stevenson screen was and got the weather observations, even as gunfire was going on either side of the Stevenson screen. He was actually under fire as he was actually taking that observation. It was incredible. And you'd think, okay, well, that happened years ago. That kind of thing surely couldn't happen today. Well, one of my investigations, the one I was mentioning, that where we were able to look at the Libyan temperature back in 1922 and declare that it was not the world's hottest temperature because it had been made improperly. When we started that investigation, I had a local representative that was part of the Libyan Weather Service, which was in 2010 under the control of Muammar Gaddafi. Okay. 2010, the revolution took place. And we had been starting our investigation of Libya's temperature, and I suddenly lost all contact with him. I couldn't get in hold of him. I didn't know if he was alive or dead. Went 6 months without hearing from him. And then all of a sudden I get an email, I'm alive, I'm alive. What he had happen is he had actually, he was in Tripoli. During the revolution, as the rebel forces were coming into Libya, into Tripoli, he took his family, got him in a car, and went over to the rebel side. And he joined the rebels. After the revolution was over, he retook his old job, but now with the rebel government. It was, again, situation where he said there were literally bullets flying over his head as he was traveling from from his office in Tripoli to reach the rebel forces. Meteorology can be a life-threatening position, believe it or not. It's one of those things where you can come under fire, apparently.
Yeah, that sounds like some pretty risky business right there. So now I guess the WMO is funded by the UN. How was it funded in the beginning before that happened?
Well, that was one of the problems, is that they needed to have funding in order to do this. And when they originally proposed all of this back in 1873, they simply didn't have the funding. What they ended up doing is all of these meteorologists went back to their home countries and they said, listen, this is such a good idea. You're going to have to contribute. And over time, it took a long time, but over time, individual countries started to realize that and contributed money to create the formation of the International Meteorological Organization, which eventually became the World Meteorological Organization. So it was funded by individual countries, which kind of is the same thing today, because the United Nations is funded by all the member countries that are associated with it. And so while an individual weather station like the Mount Washington Observatory might have been created by an individual government, although now Mount Washington is a private facility, they gave their data and they gave all their information to the World Meteorological Organization and allowed for the organization to grow. And now today, they have a pretty darn incredible, beautiful building in Geneva, Switzerland, and it is the home of the World Meteorological Organization.
WeatherBrains road trip, Dr. Jacobs. We're going to Geneva.
Let's do it.
Randy, one of the things that when I think about the WMO, I think about the naming of tropical storms and tropical cyclones around the globe. Talk about that process, when it started, and how that has evolved over time.
Yeah, one of the things that most people, other than us weather nerds, basically probably haven't ever heard of the World Meteorological Organization, except when you realize that during hurricane season, the names that are given to individual storms are from a list that has been created by the World Meteorological Organization. Once again, what the WMO did was to gather experts in tropical meteorology from around the world, and they created lists of names for these storms according to particular ocean basins. So we have a list of names for the Atlantic. We have a list of the names for the Eastern Pacific. We have a list of names for the Central Pacific. We have a list of names for the Western Pacific, and so on. So the names that you hear associated with that are associated with the WMO. Now, of course, the next question that people might ask is, why the heck do we name these? Why can't we just give them a single number? You know, call a storm 2023A or something along those lines. Well, basically what it comes down to is people pay more attention to names than they do numbers. If you to say that Hurricane 27B is coming towards you, you're probably not going to take as much action as if you hear that Hurricane Randy is coming towards you. So you tend to pay a little bit more attention to names. Now, that has been modified a little bit. Individual countries of the WMO have said, yeah, we're not thrilled with the idea of having names, people's names to some of these storms. So in certain ocean basins, like around the Philippines, for example, they will give these storms flower names, for example, or other types of things rather than people's names. I still like, though, the person that first came up with naming storms was a forecaster back in Australia, a guy by the name of Rag. And he came up with this brilliant idea. He said, let's name these storms after politicians that don't give weather enough money. So he started naming these storms after the politicians in the Australian Parliament that weren't giving significant allocations to the Bureau of Meteorology. There's something to be said for doing something like that, I would think.
Sounds like an appearance in front of Congress there, Dr. Jacobs. Get that passed through in America. That's interesting. Talk about the IPCC and its role and how it came to be, Randy, and what its work is in climate change now.
Yeah, most people have heard of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the group of scientists, and not just limited to climate scientists, but there are actually hundreds of scientists, everything from weather to economics to biology to all sorts of different aspects of things that are being changed by climate. But the IPCC scientists are under the umbrella of the United Nations. Well, as part of that, the WMO basically is in charge of how some of the work of the IPCC is done. And of course, the IPCC has put out every few years one of these reports that gives us a kind of state of the world. It tells us how our weather or how our climate has changed and what are the factors that are causing those particular changes. There's been 6 of those so far. And the scientists that are involved are scientists that are also fundamentally linked to the World Meteorological Organization. I've been incredibly fortunate that a number of my evaluation committees have had scientists that have served on that particular, on IPCC reports. In fact, one of them, one of my top polar scientists, I pull her in for almost every polar evaluation that I have, Dr. Susan Solomon. Dr. Solomon was one of the discoverers of the ozone hole down in Antarctica and showed that we were having the effect of destroying the ozone that is down over Antarctica. And she did this work all the way back in the 1980s. She is a superlative expert in polar meteorology and was part of the team, the IPCC team that was awarded the Nobel Prize. Managed to have her on a number of my committees. So it is really cool to have the the work of the World Meteorological Organization having such potential impact around the entire globe, basically impacting everybody. But it goes beyond that as well. I mean, we can talk about the globe as a whole, but we can also focus in on particular regions. Africa, for example, is one of the places where our meteorological knowledge isn't as great, simply because we've not had the investment for weather equipment and for the scientists to be down there as much as we'd love. And some of the dangers down there have not been as documented as we would like. I was mentioning some of the lightning research that we did that we've pointed out how long a lightning flash can last or how far a lightning flash can travel. Well, in places like Africa, it can also kill. And one of the records that we have, it's kind of grisly, but we actually have records on the maximum number of people that have been killed by some of these particular weather phenomena. We know, for example, that the highest number that has ever been killed by a tropical cyclone, it occurred back in 1970 with a tropical cyclone that hit into what is now Bangladesh, and it killed 300,000 people. Well, I have a committee that we put together and we documented that actually is the best number. We've also done that with lightning, and we found that there are places in Africa where incredible numbers of people have died due to lightning flashes. The greatest number of people to be killed by a single stroke of lightning, by one stroke of lightning, is 22 people. They were in southern Africa. They had all gotten into a hut, and the top of the hut was hit by lightning. The charge, of course, went down through the hut, and it killed everybody, including some children that were in the hut. So we use that kind of information. And in particular, one of my brilliant scientists, a doctor by the name of Marianne Cooper, she's the world's best lightning doctor, has developed outreach programs in Africa to try to get that information across, that lightning can be deadly and that there are certain things that you should do and not do when lightning strikes. And her work has basically saved hundreds of lives in Africa. That's part of the work that the World Meteorological Organization does as well.
Yeah, but as we saw just last August, the lady who survived that lightning strike near the White House, she lived and was one of the lucky ones, but has undergone tremendous health issues since. And that was documented in an excellent Washington Post story that was one of our picks of the week earlier this week in our show on Monday. Marianne Cooper has done a tremendous job bringing awareness to that.
And has started things like survivor groups and such that allows for the trauma that some of these people have experienced to be able to be shared, and it helps. It really, really helps. She's a great person, and her African lightning outreach is some of the best in the world. If you are thinking of trying to help people, donate to Dr. Cooper's African lightning safety group. It is really, really a good group to be involved with.
Yeah, one of my favorite shows we did of all time was show 255, which had Dr. Marianne Cooper on it. That was way back about the time you were on, Randy, in 2010. And she was a fabulous guest, and just one of our Hall of Fame shows for sure. You've written a couple of books, have a book coming out. We want to talk about that, Randy, but your 2005 book, Freaks of the Storm, if I remember correctly, had some amazing stories in it. Take us through a couple of those that you found especially unusual.
Well, talking about lightning, one of my more interesting ones that I ran across was of a situation, and I think it was in the late 90s, down in Florida. And we all know that being outside is a bad thing to do during a lightning storm, but being inside can also have some dangers as well. That you shouldn't be talking on a corded phone. You shouldn't be working on something that like a computer that is connected to a power source. Well, because lightning can hit the power line and come in and hit you. Well, there was a person in Florida who had gone to the bathroom during a lightning storm, and lightning unfortunately hit the septic line that fed into his house. Now, according to the medical report that I saw, he was catapulted off of the toilet 6 feet into the air. He did survive. According to the medical report, he complained of a quote, quote, slight tingling of his lower extremities, but he did actually survive that. So occasionally weird things can happen with weather events. And that, I think, is definitely one of the more bizarre ones that I had actually seen.
Yeah, that will get your attention real quick. Your 2009 book, Weather's Greatest Mystery Solved, had a lot of great stories in it too. Any of those come back as especially memorable?
Well, one of the ones that I found interesting, and I actually kind of updated in the book that I'm going to be having that's going to come out next year, is the notion of weather spies. You think of James Bond and this kind of stuff, and you think, well, weather's not something that would be needed to have involved with spy work. Well, back in the 1800s and early 1900s, the central part of Asia was pretty unknown to the rest of the world, and particularly in terms of things like its climate. How high were its mountains? What were the temperatures that you had as you were trekking up through towards Everest and this kind of stuff? And the British, who were in charge of India, decided they needed to get that kind of information. But the Russians were also trying to get that information. So they realized that they needed to do it in a kind of clandestine manner. So they trained what they called pundits. They were Indian scholars who were considered to be holy men. And they trained some of these pundits to take clandestine weather observations. They, for example, were given a little burner and a bowl so that as they were trekking up the mountain, in the mountains of the Himalayas, they could boil water and determine at what temperature did the water boil at. Well, from that, they could actually determine what the elevation was, because we know that as you go higher up, the boiling point of water actually changes. They trained these pundits to walk exactly in strides of 33 inches so that they could get precise measurements of the distances from one place to another. It was, for being back in the 1800s, some of the most James Bond type of spy work that I'd ever read about. And it was actually run by a British guy who was out of the Royal Geographic Society in Great Britain. It was incredible stuff. That was one of the stories that was in that particular book.
Well, tell us about the new book that's coming out next year.
New book is all about the WMO. We've done, over the last 15 years now or so, an incredible number of evaluations on different types of weather. I've mentioned things like temperature. I've mentioned things like wind. We've done things on tropical cyclones. We've done things on tornadoes. We've done things on a variety of different weather phenomena that take place over the world. And I thought it would be interesting for the general public and for weather enthusiasts as well to kind of get a behind the scenes take on how these weather evaluations are done. So each chapter, I look at a different particular evaluation that we did. And I kind of tell you the backstory of it. I tell you the players, the background of some of the scientists that were involved. And as I say, I kind of felt like Nick Fury of the Avengers here. I'm assembling teams of the world's best scientists in the world, and it's fun. And I kind of hopefully in an entertaining way give people a sense of what the WMO actually does in terms of these investigations.
Well, I would give anything to spend a couple of hours in your bookshelf back there, Randy. That is a Troy Kimmel worthy collection of books. Talk about your program at Arizona State there, and give a couple of plugs for that. And then I know Dr. Neal wants to circle back to a question that we didn't really cover in just a second. Any other panelists might have something too.
Yeah, sure. Arizona State University is the university that I'm out of. It's not the one down in Tucson. This is the one that's in Tempe, Arizona. And yes, we have a meteorology program. I don't know exactly why, but across the country, I think if you go to most meteorology programs, you're going to find that there is a predominance of men. It's just the nature of the beast. For the last 15 years, I have had in my undergraduate meteorology program more women going through it than I have men. It's great. I love it. It's fascinating to have that many women. Usually it's a 50-50 mix on any given year of men to women that are in my meteorology classes. And we have students that when they graduate are able to work at places like the National Weather Service. One of my graduates, she's one of the top people in the Western region of the National Weather Service. I have another, Dr. Russ Vos, a former student of mine, who's one of the head honchos at Asheville at the National Centers for Environmental Information. We have a very good program. It's small, but it's a very, very good program, and very, very proud of it. I'm particularly proud of the quality of my students that are going through it. And you said there was another question then that you had?
Well,
or?
I've got one, and then over to Jen. So I've got a question on, I guess, in situ observations at the surface. So I'm sure you've seen this map that the WMO puts out that countries, and it's kind of color coded with all the different surface obs that they provide, and it's very disproportional, with US and Europe probably covering the map with the most density. But I was curious from like the WMO perspective, what are they doing, or are they doing anything to try to get more instruments deployed in these lesser developed countries? Some of them usually have unstable governments or regimes, and it's one of those things I worry that if they just give them money, it goes into a black hole. Like, what's the strategy of trying to deploy instruments in countries that have, I guess, questionable, unstable governments?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. There's a couple different ways that the WMO is trying to handle that. We don't normally work with the actual government of the country. We work with their National Weather Service. So if we're going into an African country, for example, we will be talking to the people, the principal officers that are associated with their National Weather Service. And so there hopefully is a greater likelihood that if we are able to give them money to set up a network, or to encourage them to set up a network, it'll be done through their weather service, as opposed to giving it to the leader of a country that might translate that into arms or such. The other thing that we're doing is remote sensing, that a lot more of our information is coming from satellite technology without the direct need for having a station on the ground. Now, they're not one-to-one equivalents yet. And so, for example, when we're looking at weather extremes and we talk about the hottest temperature, I get emails every week or so from somebody that tells me, well, there's a place in the Sahara that has been judged to be much hotter than 134 degrees in Death Valley. Well, I say, yeah, we don't have a weather station there. So right now we are not accepting a remotely sensed temperature as being an extreme because unfortunately we don't know exactly where that temperature is being monitored at. Normally it's a surface temperature. And as most of you know, that a surface temperature isn't going to necessarily be reflective of what it is at Stephenson's screen height of, say, 1.5 meters. When we're evaluating these records, we have to make sure that they're following all the correct WMO procedures for how their station was set up, how it's being monitored, whether the terrain around it is reflective of the actual terrain of the given area. It's one of those things that here in Arizona, I had a station that was located out along the west coast or along west side of the state at Bullhead City. And they liked being the hottest place in the state. When we went out and we looked at their sensor and it was put over an asphalt parking lot, we said, you know, that's not really representative of where it is. Move it across the street where they had a big patch of open desert, and you'll get reflective. So we got them to move it there. And then a few years later, we noticed that suddenly their temperatures went up. They moved it back because they wanted to have the higher temperatures again. So there is this tendency that you got to make sure that you're measuring the right stuff. And it's a never-ending task, but we do it as best as we can.
Hi, Randy. You mentioned earlier the tornado record for amount of tornadoes in a 24-hour period was the 2011 super outbreak. I was just curious if what are some of the other tornado statistics records that you keep track of, not only in the US, but internationally too?
Oh, let me see here real quick if I can pull some of those up we have the highest mortality that are associated with a tornado. In Bangladesh, back in 1989, there was a tornado that went through a heavily populated area. And of course, the infrastructure in a place like Bangladesh, you can't get any warnings out. And in fact, you know, they don't normally have warnings that go out anyway. We have 1,300 people that died from one outbreak of tornadoes that occurred over Bangladesh back in 1989. The longest distance that a tornado has traveled is still the classic tri-state tornado of 1925. Had a number of scientists that have gone over that record very carefully. And while there is some disagreement, most of the scientists that have looked at the records say it was one continuous distance of 219 miles traveled by that tri-state tornado. I mentioned the biggest outbreak. Well, one of the more recent ones that we had that we verified was the widest tornado on record in terms of its diameter. And that was the infamous El Rio tornado in Oklahoma back in 2011 that killed the storm chasers. That tornado was judged by Doppler radar to have a diameter of 2.6 miles in width. So a very, very big tornado. And of course, the strongest wind speeds, we list that. We don't list it as being the strongest wind speeds recorded because it's an estimate based off of Doppler radar. But the strongest wind speeds that we have estimated at the surface have been 302 miles an hour, and that was associated with the Moore, Oklahoma tornado back in 1999.
That's too funny, Dr. Neal. You have gone for a couple of records with your leaf blower out here.
Oh yeah, I mean, I used to have a weather station on the roof of my house that was networked. I won't tell which company, but I'd go up there and hit it with the leaf blower when I was cleaning out the rain gutters just to see if I could get a 200 plus mile an hour observation through the QC system. And I'm pleased to say it wasn't flagged by the QC at all.
Well, that probably would work in Oklahoma on the Oklahoma Messinet, Kim. They put some pretty important wind velocities out there of note, especially some tonight too. Dr. Span, I think we're done from the panel side. You got the hard questions ready for Randy?
Yeah, well, I was going to apologize to Dr. James Adelot. I don't think I recognized him at the top of the show. I figured he was either not on here or working storms. James, you okay?
So far, so good. Just kind of watching everything west of I-35. And man, Rick is in chat doing a great job with the Weather Service in Norman. They have been very busy.
Wouldn't it have been fun to have had a camera on Rick tonight during the show?
Yeah, let's look at these things real quick. And again, I have been busy as could be here. We've got I've had everything from water spouts in Mobile Bay to tornadoes in the Florida Panhandle to hail up here. It has been pretty wild here, and this is the situation out there. Kim, what's going on? It looks like you're getting closer there.
It is, but this the stuff that's kind of congealing ahead of the line, I'm hoping that actually taps the environment a bit, and I think that might be happening already. The storms back behind this line had been a little bit more intense about 30 minutes ago, and there'd been a set of tornado warnings all along that line, and some indications of rotation. If you watch, you can see the line starting to appear to fall apart a bit. So I'm almost wondering if the environment has just been so unstable, and that we're getting so much convection over such a wide area that it might be helping us to avoid the MCS of doom. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We might get some hail, though, out of this stuff that is congealing just to our west. If this, as it builds and hooks right, catching that upper level flow pattern, then I still might lose my roof, but I don't know. In living in Oklahoma, you just you take what you can get sometimes. So losing the roof is better than other options on some days. So we're
you haven't had that roof long enough to get too attached to it.
And I got to admit, I'm struggling with the show title, MCS of Doom or Catapulted Off the Toilet. One of those two, they're in the running at this point. James Adelot, how's this going to affect Tulsa?
I've just been looking at the WAFS ensemble stuff that NSSL is running, which is a great tool if you're in the domain and they're running it. We'll have a little bit of a risk, but I don't think it's going to maintain this level of intensity all the way over to me. It'll be late, but gosh, the last tornado warning coverage we did was February 26th there. So I'm not thinking that's going to be a widespread concern, but it's odd. Some of the model soundings increase a low-level jet, and it's weird to say that in June. So, if the photograph enlarges just a little bit, we'll have to get all QLCSy. And too bad Rick's not here to enjoy that word.
Yeah. And again, for those listening to the podcast here or watching later, we are recording the show Thursday evening, June 15th. I know that we're typically on Mondays, and this show is released on Monday, June the let's see, we're releasing the show on what day? June the 19th. But anyway, so the storms in progress are back on June the 15th, but it's a very interesting situation over Oklahoma. And we all knew that Rick was not going to be here tonight. So he's working the chat, James, in the NWS chat.
Oh, yeah. And I was just looking at radar. The storm southwest of Oklahoma City, north of Chickasha, has a really robust ZDR tower well above freezing. So, yeah, you're coming in on it. Look just west of Tuttle, just southwest of Tuttle is probably the most robust updraft in that mess right now. But let's hope it just continues to be a little bit of a mess and not super organized.
Yeah, I guess, and again, I'll kind of preview my pick of the week. Did you guys see the tweet from Jeff Piotrowski out in the Texas Panhandle?
Yes,
that
Perryton had a bad hit.
Terrible. Yeah.
Again, he tweeted, I need massive mutual aid, at least 12 ambulances to respond to a Perryton, Texas tornado. We have massive damage. over 50 homes destroyed and heavy damage downtown. That doesn't sound good. So again, just a rough night here. So anyway, what we're going to do here is we're going to morph into, and again, we don't have Tony this week because we're doing a Thursday special. So we're going to go to Jen's This Week in Tornado History, and we're going to come back and we're going to skip the email segment this week just to save some time. And we're going to maybe talk a little other weather roundup stuff around the rest of the country and the tropics, the interesting tropical situation. And then we'll do picks of the week as much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
This week in tornado history, June 20th, 1957, an estimated F5 tornado devastated the city of Fargo, North Dakota. A newer section in the northwestern part of the city was hit, and all property in an area 5 city blocks wide and 20 blocks long was destroyed. Over 1,300 homes were damaged or destroyed. Some were leveled and swept away, and there were 10 fatalities. For Thomas Grisoulis and significant tornadoes, 6 children were killed in one family. There were over 100 injuries. Debris from the tornado was found approximately 54 miles to the north of Fargo. Ted Fujita did an in-depth study on what occurred. Per Thomas Grisoulis, the Fargo report was a landmark effort in both a detailed mapping and in efforts to understand the tornado life cycle. In a 60th anniversary summary of this event, the National Weather Service in Fargo noted that Fujita would coin the terms wall cloud, tail cloud, and collar cloud after analyzing over 200 photos from the Fargo tornado. The Fargo F5 is listed in the Storm Prediction Center database with a straight line path length of 52.4 miles. After Fujita's work with the event, he determined this was actually a family of 5 tornadoes. This F5 was the third. Grisoulis lists the path length of the Fargo tornado as 9 miles. The National Weather Service in Fargo, in their summary, denote this 9-mile path and the fact that this was a part of a family of tornadoes. We have a detailed summary about this big event at tornadotalk.com.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
So again, we're recording the show on June 15th. It is pouring up here, Bill Murray. I don't know if it's raining where you are, but it is a quagmire here in Hoover, on the south side of Birmingham. But while we're on the subject of tornadoes, Jen, I wanted to kick it up to you real quick. Tell us about the Ohio tornadoes today. I've seen some pretty wild video coming out of there.
Yeah, there's been some pretty active weather off with a big cell that was moving south of Sandusky, and now it's sliding southeast near the Worcester area, which is southwest of Akron. And there is rotation with it. I haven't seen a lot of reports. I've stayed off of the social media tonight. So have there been reports of tornadoes, James, that you've seen?
I've seen some video coming out of some of those cells up there. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
Unless the old video, it sure looked like absolutely we had some down. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Very active.
Sandusky has a history with tornadoes, doesn't it, Jen? Sandusky, Ohio.
Yes, it was the Sandusky Lorraine 1920. Oh boy, I say I'm not as good as the guys are with the dates. It's 1920s 4, I think. Sandusky Lorraine, big one up that way. But yeah, there's a corridor up there that they get a lot of nasty storms that roll through. We had a thunderstorm closer to me, but it's been sub-severe, which is good. Just a little lightning with it and some heavier rain, maybe some pea-size hail. But yeah, it's weird pattern we're in. That's for sure.
Yeah, we've had some very photogenic tornadoes down here in the deep south. Yesterday, one near Abbeville, Alabama, which is in the southeast corner of the state, and that thing crossed the line into Georgia. And goodness, that thing looked like something you'd see in Kansas in late May instead of South Georgia in June. And then we had another one in Eufaula, Alabama. So it's been a pretty anomalous setup here with this upper low up Jen's direction. And we got this really strong mid-level wind flow down here that is not representative of June. Randy, is the monsoon cranked up? When does it start?
Well, monsoon actually technically starts today. We a few years back, the National Weather Service decided to go with a set starting date like the hurricane season, as opposed to what the old traditional method was, which was to base it on how many days of a dew point of 55 degrees or higher averaged for a given location. So for Phoenix, we're not going to get to the thunderstorm phase of the monsoon until probably the first week of July. And that's assuming that we start getting moisture, which right now, if you look down in Mexico, they're not having any kind of a start to the monsoon. And they usually are started by this time.
What are your needs in terms of rain during a monsoon season? I know that's when you get most of the rain there. What do you need?
Not really. Actually, wintertime rain is much more important for us because the rim country of Arizona, we have dams that hold into that moisture and we can use it later on. We average about 2.5 inches here in Phoenix during the monsoon out of our total 8 inches that we get during the course of a year. So we don't get a lot, but 2.5 inches is usually what we get during the monsoon.
How has the heat been in Phoenix so far this summer?
Really mild, which is one reason why we haven't had the moisture starting to come up from Mexico, because part of what drives the moisture to come up from the Gulf of California and from the Pacific Ocean is the creation of a thermal low over the deserts. Well, today, for example, we didn't get over 100 degrees. And for us at this time of year, normally our temperatures are on the order of 105 to 110. And occasionally, last year, we were up to 115 this time of year. So being below 100 right now is pretty odd. It's been a mild, for us old timers in Arizona, it's been a mild May and June so far.
Yeah, for those that are not watching, Randy's wearing an Alaskan hat and he's in a big parka right now. I will say there's a pretty impressive heat dome building over South Texas. We've got a radio station we do down there, and Bill, you'll deal with this next week. I'm forecasting 108 for McAllen, Texas, early next week, and they've got a heat advisory, and they're going to be trapped under that thing for a while, which is kind of nasty. But anyway, the tropics. Anybody got any thoughts on this wave coming off the coast of Africa? A little odd to see an X in that spot in June. Who's our tropical expert? Neil, what say you?
I don't know. It's kind of weird. It was on the last 2 runs of the Euro, and then it kind of just fizzled it out as it got into the Caribbean. And then if you look at the 18Z GFS, it's just got a big storm there. But if you look at the 12Z, it's like, nope, no storm.
Yeah, it's like on again, off again. It's 12
yeah,
hour
it's really strange.
differences in the cycles.
I wonder if it's got something to do with the radio sons in the 0 and 12Z runs and not in the 6 and 18Z runs, but something strange. But we got a couple weeks to think about it.
Have we had a June tropical system come out of that region anytime in recent years? I can't recall one this early in the season. Can you?
I mean, there's things that look like waves that may or may not get classified, but I mean, they would normally develop out that far.
Yeah. So again, that's the current little X on the tropical maps, is that wave coming off the coast of Africa, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. But let's roll into picks of the week. This is where we go around the horn. Everybody shares something that is weather related. This can be a website, hardware, software, anything remotely closely related to weather. And again, I picked Piotrowski's tweet from the Texas Panhandle, and that he's got a photograph of some of the damage out there. It looks pretty bad. So, Jen, let's kick it up to you for your pick of the week. What you got for us?
I continue to monitor these articles about the AI DJs for radio. I'm just very curious to see what the different takes are. And so Randy Lane, who's a radio coach, had a good take that I can get on board with about how radio can use AI voices for different tasks like commercial copy or giveaways, event announcements. He said he was listening to one and it must have been an AI voice, because all it talked about was, so they play a song and then they talk about Disneyland, and then they play a song and they talk about Disneyland. So there was absolutely no variation. And so he said, the future of radio and podcasting is in our talent. We know that AI voices will not replace people because they do not have flaws. And so that is very good to know, because I have many flaws. And so hopefully for a while, I will continue with a job in radio. So
Like
I-
AI, they
that's
got
my
no
rebuttal.
those voices. They got no soul. They got no heart. You know, I mean, come
No.
on. I mean, flaws,
don't-
heart, soul. I mean, you got to
Hey,
have it.
They
Uh,
don't say stinking hot. So
No, no,
that's
no,
what I
no, no.
say.
They don't talk about MCSs of doom and being
Nope.
catapulted off the toilet. So there you go. So let's go to James Adelot in Tulsa. James, give us something good.
Yes, sir. Rebecca Ray tweeted this afternoon a softball-sized hailstone in Lawton. And it sounds like Lawton had quite a bit of damage from straight line winds and this just enormous hail too. So that was a beast of an HP storm. Had a lot of had multiple updrafts, multiple little mesos in it that were intermittently putting down confirmed tornadoes. And I bet a lot of chasers lost some windshields today.
Ooh, goodness. Yeah, let's go to our hail correspondent, Kim. Hey, Kim, give us a good pick before you get blown away by these storms out there.
Yeah, before I get cored as I
Yeah.
nervously watch this stuff out to my west northwest. My pick of the week, AMS, the American Meteorological Society, has opened up its abstract submissions for its annual meeting. So if you have something to submit, get your stuff in. It's the season.
Where's AMS next year? Do we know?
Baltimore.
We're Baltimore in January. So it's going to be just as exciting as when we were in Boston in January. another roll of the dice. Another roll of the dice.
Another super spreader event.
Yeah.
Can we not? Yes.
All right, Neil, bail us out. Give us a good pick. Go.
I don't know if I'm going to bail you out, but my pick of the week is from Flying Magazine. The title is Simulating Thunderstorm Convection Craziness. And it's pilots can explore flying in massive lightning-laden downpours in the Microsoft Flight Simulator, which offers convection realism. And if you go down through the article, they've got some screen captures. And the only thing I can think of is if you've ever played Doom and you go to like nightmare mode, you can select this. And down at the bottom, it's got what's labeled as some tips. And it says, be sure to use the realistic turbulence option selected via the in-game menu.
Ooh.
Sounds like fun.
And let me just say, convection realism. That's another great show title potential here. We've had a pile of these things tonight. All right, Bill Murray, go. What you got?
Yeah, James, I'm excited. Well, my pick of the week is from Axios. A story today about the increasing number of fire weather days across the United States from 1973 to 2022, and it's I don't have to tell any of our friends in the West, including Randy, probably, that fire danger seems to be getting worse and worse with time. Excited to have Randy tonight. Thank you for joining us. Great show. We get together next on Monday, June 26th. Tim Bryce, friend of the podcast, has put together an outstanding panel from the National Weather Service Southern Region Women's Conference. My other favorite, Jen McNatt, will be a part of that. So I'm really excited about that. On the 5th, we have a commitment from Hannah Strong, who's television meteorologist in Louisville. And her dad is a famous person, at least in SEC sports discussions. Her dad, of course, is the commissioner of the SEC, Greg Sankey, and we're trying to get him lined up to join her that night. We have a very narrow window because she's going to have a baby in July. So we're trying to pull that off for July 5th. And we got some other fantastic shows coming up through the rest of July, including Tabitha Bartow, who's going to join us on the 27th of July. Remember, she was at the center of a controversy. News director, television station forced her off the air because she wouldn't coincide with their hair desires for her. So it's going to be an interesting show to talk about. But we got some great shows coming up in the next few weeks, James.
Awesome. All right, Randy, we've stalled long enough. Give us something good, something exciting.
Well, I've got to plug my particular website. So all these extremes that I've been talking about on your show here can be found at wmo.asu.edu, and that is the official website. You were mentioning tropical cyclones right now. One of the big things that happened this spring that many of you might remember is that we had that tropical cyclone that was off of India that went across the Indian Ocean, tropical cyclone Freddie, that we are currently investigating as being the longest lasting tropical cyclone on record. Now, that is involving some pretty impressive new work that we have to do on actually determining what is a tropical cyclone. Do we, because different parts of the world use slightly different ideas as to what it is. And so we are coming up with a pretty good discussion of the top tropical cyclone people around the world as to whether Freddie will be the longest lasting, the longest distance, the longest lasting tropical cyclone on record.
Wow.
Is Ginger the current longest, Randy?
The current is one called John that was back in 1979 that was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, actually across the international date line.
All right. And by the way, I had a chance to see our friend Ken Graham, Bill, the director of the National Weather Service.
Oh, yeah. You had dinner with him, didn't you?
Yeah. He was in town. Great to see Ken. And I wrote a piece. You can read. That's a tease for the newsletter article for those that subscribe to the email newsletter. But great to see Ken. And he had some folks with him from headquarters, and I had my folks, and we just had a great time talking about stuff, some easy issues, some hard issues. We had a lot of laughs, and it was just great to see Ken. It was a very good thing here. So, all right. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up. So, Randy, anything else we need to anything we need to plug on your behalf other than your website?
No, that's fine. I'll come back when the book is actually published, and we can talk about the new book come out.
Yeah, about to say you got to do that. That'll be great. So, again, thanks a lot for all that are listening and watching. And again, we're going to be back on the regular schedule here soon. But again, this is the show for the week of the 19th. We'll be back on Monday, June the 26th. And if you're new here, we typically record on Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. A lot of people do watch on YouTube. We're live when we do the show, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. But most of you listen, and we thank you for that. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address we have, it's email@weatherbrains.com. We're going to do a long email segment on the next show. But on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for watching and listening. Have a great week, and God bless.
So, James Spann, what barbecue joint did you take the director of the National Weather Service to, like Huck's Rib Shack or what?
We just went to Ragtime next door here. It's just, it was a break in the schedule, and we had to take a close one here. So, Ragtime Cafe. All right, everybody. Thank y'all.